This conference will now be recorded.
So I'm really excited once again for this session. Let's make sure that all our microphones are turned off. Use the chat box if you have any questions or comments, and we'll get to them at the end of Max's presentation. But before we begin, I would like to introduce to you our NAHARA board president, Judith Wright.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in this country. I am Judy Wright, and it's my privilege really to serve as your president of NAHARA. As Janet mentioned, we had a great conference in San Antonio. We're looking to seeing everyone in Gila River in Chandler, Arizona. I don't want to take too much of Max's time because he has a great presentation, but we are here. If you ever have any questions, please reach out to Janet, Barb, myself, or any of the board members, and we will try to get you the resources that you need. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. So without further ado, I present to you Max.
Hello, everyone. Let me add my welcome to our program today. We're scheduled to run about 60 minutes. We have a lot to cover, and so if you don't have an opportunity, I'll try and preserve some time for Q&A at the end. If you have to, first of all, if you don't have time, you have to get off. Please note my email at maxmullerassociates.com, and also for those of you who would like a copy of the slides that I'm about to use, just let me know and I will get off to you. Once again, Max at maxmullerassociates.com. As far as our subject matter today, I think this is one of those really vital topics for every HR practitioner or benefits manager to really know about. If you think about recruiting, onboarding, and so on, it is like a river flowing downstream. And what happens in the headwaters of the river are going to impact everything that happens downstream. Now, we're not going to necessarily talk about recruiting today, although recruiting begins with a really good job description. And I will mention that as we move along here. But primarily, I want to talk about the fact that all too often, a good set of candidates are recruited, for a position, but then either they get turned off through a bad interview with the prospective employer, or it's the right person hired for the wrong job. Time and again throughout my career, and I've been dealing with HR matters for many years. I've actually been an attorney 50 years, and HR has primarily been one of my main areas of concern. And some of you that are also SHRM members probably, maybe, hopefully, own a copy of the book I wrote for SHRM years ago, The Manager's Guide to HR. And where I'm going with this is that in the course of the years, I've had many interviews where a candidate really wasn't the right person for the particular job in question, but they were perfect for something else. And so honestly, what happens in the headwaters of the river really matter downstream. Today, we're going to talk about interviewing. I want to mention to you, though, that what happens after you interview. And on November 2nd, there's going to be another Coffee with NAHARA that talks about what happens next. A gentleman by the name of Jeff Yates, who's the Director of Business Development for S3 Management Group, is going to be doing a program on November 2nd titled, So You Hired Your Employee at Your Tribal Business, What's Next? And so that might be the next step in this progression of following the workflow stream. As far as our material today, I'm going to follow this sort of sequence. I want to talk about what behavior-based interviewing is. I urge all of you who've not used this technique before, please start using it. Again, I've been dealing with this subject matter for many years, this whole thing about recruiting and onboarding and so on and so forth. And you're going to have a much higher success rate in hiring well and firing less if in fact you follow this kind of a practice. I want to talk about how you draft behavioral interviewing questions, and start BI many of the time as sort of a verbal shorthand. But A lot of what I want to talk to you about is how to actually draft the right questions. Many of the questions don't really have a question mark at the end of them. They actually begin with things like, tell me, show me, explain to me. Now, they really are the questions though, even though once again, they don't have like the traditional, tell me about yourself, am I right? Or something like that, again, with a question mark. I want to talk about how you get data to actually put together the correct question for the particular position in question, and that follows the culture of either your department or your tribe or whoever the employer that you're representing might be. That will be broken down into essential, non-essential functions, things of that nature. And I have some templates that I'll be sharing with you here in just a few minutes. Now, questions are not the only ones you ask during an interview. They simply get interleaved into other questions. Some questions are just for verification. I understand that you are an enrolled member of XYZ. I understand that you have a degree in X. I understand you have, so a lot of things are simply, basically closed-end questions that only call for a yes or a no or a very short type of response. That's fine. The BI questions have their place that we'll talk about as we go along. Now, there are questions you shouldn't ask. Now, I'm going to repeat this downstream, but everyone, if there is a question you don't need the answer to make a hiring decision or to put the person at ease, etc., don't ask the question. And once again, before we move on, in the event you don't have an opportunity to ask a question during the session itself, and email me, I'll do my very best to respond. All right. Now, I have a number of reference slides that I'm going to be sharing with you. The reason is we simply don't have the time in the time allowed to us to go over in detail some of what I feel are very critical pieces of information, particularly how are some of these questions worded? What's the sense of them? And that's what some of the slides will have on it. Also, some of you are doing background checks using organizations that are covered by the Fair Credit Reporting Act. There's some reference slides on that. I am not going to cover it as part of my presentation in chief, but once again, the reference slides should help you out. Having said that, let's begin. BI is known by a lot of different things. It's competency-based interviews, it's performance-based interviewing, it's targeted selection. But whatever it's called, because these are all real different ways of describing the same thing, it is asking for information about what someone has actually done in different situations as opposed to what they might do in a hypothetical situation. The situations that you want information on are, of course, the things relevant to your own organization and the specific job in question. So I want to repeat this. It's vital to an understanding of the whole BI concept. You're asking people for information about what has actually happened, their position, their role, their thinking, given a particular situation. And what situation would that be? Something that is relevant to either, are they going to be successful at your job or are they not? So that past behavior is basically an indicator of what they might do in the future in similar situations. Now, some of you probably have been exposed to BI before. Either you've written something, a different a webinar, workshop, whatever, and chances are pretty good that whoever presented that material, either in verbal form, what they used were phrases like, it is a predictor of future behavior. I personally do not believe that it is a predictor. I think it is an indicator, because some of you are going to be dealing with people who are very new to their position, their career, could be the very first job out of high school or college or whatever. And so the way that they are analyzing information, the way they input it, analyze it, and then there's an end result that they act on whatever that is going to change over time as they become experienced, more educated. Life roughs them up a little bit. The real world intrudes theoretical things and what have you. And so in the fullness of time, all of us, as we mature in our business, careers, so to speak, we're going to make different decisions than we may have made under a different set of circumstances, a different time. However, having said that, I do believe that once again, what did they do? Circumstances is a pretty good indicator of what will happen at your place. Now, this is also a way of looking at thought processes and problem solving skills. So really, it makes it harder for them to make things up. Now, it helps you determine their experience, their behaviors, their potential for success. But I want to go back to the point about making things up. You know, if you are counseling people on how to take an interview, to engage in an interview, chances are, whether you've called it this or not, excuse me, you have suggested to them the IPAR approach or the STAR approach to interviewing. They're very, very similar. And there is nothing wrong with an applicant using this technique. In fact, whenever I'm trying to coach someone on, hey, this is how you do an interview, these are the things I urge them to do. It actually makes it easier on you, the interviewer, if they actually use these techniques, because it cuts to the chase. They actually begin to give you the relevant information. But in both cases, one second, please. What happens is you're asking about some topic, so they have stories from their own history in mind. They would have 2 or 3 stories of something that has happened that they can use interchangeably in different situations. Example, it is a common question in an interview to say, tell me about your greatest success. It's also a normal thing to say, tell me about your greatest failure. Now, someone who is exposed to this kind of a response, they understand that they have a story and they'll say something like this. Let's say if for this theoretical that you have said, tell me about your greatest success. Okay. Now, if I was answering, I would say, oh, well, listen, let me tell you about my greatest success. Then I would tell you what that is. I would immediately pivot, though, at the end of it and segue into saying this. But you want to know something? My greatest success came from my greatest failure. And then I tell you about my greatest failure. So I've precluded you, I've closed you off as the interviewer from putting me on the spot, and corner about, well, what's the worst thing you've ever done, sort of a thing. If you go the other way, then I would simply reverse it. Well, my greatest failure was blah, blah, blah. But you know what I learned from that? I learned X, Y, Z, which led to my greatest success, which was. And so by asking a behavior-based question, even though they are still going to use this kind of an approach, the IPAR one is identifying or noticing the problem, describing what the issue is that they were working on, what the team thing was supposed to be, the desired outcome was supposed to be, or whatever. The action they took. When you ask them about team building, you really want to know what part they played in the team. All right. Even if they were not the team leader. And so what action did they take? Not what the overall team did, unless that's really what you're interested in, but it's what was their contribution. Do you really care in their situation? The outcome was yes and no. It's how did they, what role did they play in getting there? And so it's harder to make things up if you've already put them on, you've asked them, as I say, a behaviorally asked question rather than a generic. And they get the result. The STAR thing is very, very similar. It's they identify the situation or task for you, the action they took, and the results they achieved. Now, this is a very preferable thing to do, as opposed to saying things like, you get along well with your coworkers? Well, what do you expect someone to say? No, I hate people. I like living out in the woods by myself. Of course, they're going to give you a generic answer because you asked a generic question. Oh, yeah, everyone loves me. So now you're trying to move forward. You go, well, would you say you're an organized person? Oh, yeah, I can find stuff. They still haven't given you any answer because you really didn't ask anything. Are you able to multitask? Oh, yeah, I juggle multiple projects all the time. And then so you say, well, okay, enough of this. I'm going to turn their words back on them. So do you often juggle multiple, projects? And they go, oh, yeah, I multitask. So they're coming back, back at you. And by the way, that technique where you actually repeat something that they have said to you is called parroting. In terms of communications and interviewing, there are a couple of things, really good techniques. One of them is simply repeating the last few words that they said. And then the second thing is then being quiet. Many interviewers love the sound of their own voice. They don't even give the person an opportunity to answer a question, or it's like they're the ones being interviewed. They're so busy saying, well, that happened to me once. And then it's like they had been asked a question about their life and, how well they're going to do in this job, as opposed to, keeping on track. So one is that everyone silence once you've asked a question is imperative. Anyone that generally was raised in the United States does not like a silence that they did not create themselves, that they have no control over. Think about, for example, a situation where you called an organization up and they put you on hold. They didn't even give you a chance to say anything. Acme Corporation, hold please, and bang, they put you on hold. And you're going, oh, ooh, wow, it's upsetting. Compare that when they say something like, could you hold for a moment, please? Well, you're going to say yes. All right. Or they say, I'll be with you in just a minute. At least they've given you some choice. They've also maybe put a time frame on it. All right. And those of you at the NAHARA conference in San Antonio, those of you who attended a program I did, remember that I actually, before we got going, said we're going to start in about 5 minutes, we're going to start in about 3 minutes, we're going to start in about 1 minute. And so I was doing that so that the organization, the audience would not grow restless. It gave them control over the silence. And so again, most people will rush to fill a silence. So you ask your question and at least wait a few seconds to let someone digest what you ask them. It ordinarily takes 5 to 7 seconds for someone to actually understand the question that you've even asked them. And so give them a chance to digest it and then, form a response to you. Okay. Now, in terms of something I kind of, mentioned just a second ago, you want to make sure that you're asking questions that are relevant to, a particular, issue. In other words, before you ask a question, ask yourself, why asking this question of this particular applicant? Here's an example. On the screen right now, we have a customer service type person, a headset, and we have someone who is in a custodial role. Now, if I want to know something about how they handle stress and tight situations, which person should I ask this question of? Describe a situation when you were able to identify a conflict between two individuals and were instrumental in the resolution of that conflict. Chances are the person who's a custodian often works alone, or in one of your tribe's hotels, if you have that kind of an enterprise and what have you, they might be a housekeeper. So here's someone who works alone. So of what value is that question to that person? Probably no value whatsoever. Does it have value to someone who's going to be handling, some strife among different parties? Sure, then it's a perfectly good question. So now you say, well, Max, what would you then ask the custodian? Well, I would ask something like this. Describe a situation where your normal way of getting to work was not available. Tell me what you did. So that's how we find out, do they have a sense of responsibility or not? Someone who says, Well, I couldn't get there, so I couldn't get there. That's the way it was, and nothing I could do about it. Versus someone who says, I sure tried. I called, my significant other. I called my cousin. I immediately reached out to my boss and said, I'm trying to, get there and what have you. And then ultimately, when I couldn't, I called and I said, I'm so very sorry. I really did try to get there. So obviously, it shows how they think, their sense of responsibility, and what have you. So once the questions you ask, these behavior-based questions, do need to fit the situation that you're going to put the person in, rather than generics. Now, are data sets of different types of BI questions? Actually, there are. If you simply go out and start Googling things, Google behavioral interview questions, performance-based questions, things like that, there's dozens of them, hundreds of them, and what have you. But don't just look at those and take them at face value. Sift and sort through them. Yeah, basically curate them. And pull together different sets of questions for the different types of jobs that you're hiring people for. Housekeeping is going to be one. Facilities management something else. An IT person something else, etc. But you want to make it relevant. All right. Now, here is sort of an example of what I'm talking about, again, as far as questions that are more relevant. It's like a general question that is not very good because it really doesn't ask anything is, are you a team player? And again, you're going to get this simplistic answer, yeah, I work well with others. But how about something more like this? Tell me about a specific project you worked on. I'm interested in learning about the roles of everyone involved. So think about why you would ask that. You want to know what they did, or what they specifically did. But by describing their teammates, you're also going to see whether or not they really are a team player. If basically they start slamming everyone else, well, there was this project, and there was this lady Mary who worked with me on it, and we all had to drag her along, and there was another person there who basically just did the minimum, and there's a term going around HR now, quiet quitting, where a person only does the bare minimum and nothing more. One of those guys on the team too, and blah 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 blah, and yet not one word so far about giving credit to anyone else. Yes, we want to hear what they had to say for themselves, and if they take credit, properly, for something they did, that's awesome. But notice in my example that if someone didn't say any more than I just, indicated, where they slammed two of their teammates, gave no praise to anyone else, or they give scant praise, yeah, and we had some other people and they were pretty good. I'm not sure I want that person. As far as in a team environment, I'm not so sure that anything's there. Now, you could, though, follow up. All right, you could follow up with other BI questions in a situation like that. For example, let's go to this the Mary person. Well, she never did anything, all that. And a question would be, what did you do to try to help her? Then let's see what they say. They might say, and I don't know what a good answer would be. I know what my own feelings would be. It would be that they at least tried to reach out a hand to help the person, or to come to them. It's like, Mary, I really need this, and I need it by the deadline that we were set. And if you don't get it here, then look at the ripple effect through all the rest of us. Blah 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 blah. So I'm not saying that there's one answer instead than the other. My point for obviously this program that we're having now is a probing question that asks about something that they actually did in a given situation will begin to uncover their thinking process, their decision making, all of those sorts of things. Okay. Now, common setups for BI type questions are things like tell me, describe, have you ever. Now, that is a yes no question, all right, which a closed end question, which could be used as a setup for an actual BI question. In other words, have you ever dealt cards in a casino before? Yes. Well, how did you pick up your skill? What training did you have? So they tell you, was that a pretty good course? How'd you do? So you can follow up by, once again, you set up a yes no kind of thing, and then depending on the answer, either you just simply move on, and if they say yes, then in fact you go forward. Now notice some of you, or think about it. My guess is some of you are saying, well, Max, if they say no, shouldn't I ask a hypothetical? What would you do? I don't think so. They've told you no. There are other questions that would lead you to understand, do they have the aptitude to learn that new set? If they say no, but then expand on it and they say, but I have, at my fraternity parties, and what have you, play cards all the time, and usually I'm the dealer, and so I really understand how the game is played, and so on and so forth. Then fine. Even though they've said no, they've expanded on it to turn it into a yes. And remember what I said a moment ago about IPAR and the STAR method. Someone who really has prepared themselves to take the interview will use even a negative opportunity to tell you about themselves. All right. Now, why did you? Which is more important to you? Why, etc. Now, along with this, you could do something like this, going along with this idea of setting up a question that they tell me, describe, and so forth. You might ask someone, and I always do, you know about our organization, or what do you know about our tribe? So the person either says, well, nothing, which I don't think is a very good answer. But if they say, well, I understand your organization, provides, inventory control for your, truck stop that you have out on Highway 71. Okay, so they've done some homework, all right? But now we want to ask the next question, which is, how did you learn about us? So now we've asked a BI question. They've given us a nice answer. Okay, I know that your organization does, then whatever it is. Bravo. I mean, that's a good thing. But again, we now want to ask, what did you learn about us? What did you do? That's going to give us insight into their persistence and how well they actually do, in fact, prepare themselves for situations generally. Okay. Now, um, these types of competency and behavior-based questions do, in fact, standardize the interviewing process so that to a large extent you're asking the same basic question sets of every candidate. Now, obviously, depending on a candidate's responses to whatever you ask them, that's going to lead you down different pathways in terms of asking the next set of questions, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, at least the basic question set is fair. Otherwise, honestly, if someone is chatty and friendly and what have you, and bobs their head and and reinforces, you make a statement and they reinforce it and all that, and you like that, and someone else who could be a wonderful candidate and be very successful in the job isn't, they're not as expressive, and they sit there and they catch you kind of stoically, and they don't say much and what have you. And um, uh, everyone in Max Muller and Associates, the organ I own, we're a training consulting company, and I've been doing this since 1990, long time ago. And I've had plenty of audiences, and I've done, believe it or not, I can't even believe it, I've done over 3,000 programs all over the world, in person, remote learning, webinars, all of that. And I can tell you time and again, I will read, let's say, a set of evaluations at the end of the day, and it's been a really tough audience because they've given me no feedback. They just sit there and they look at me, and then I'll read it on an evaluation. What a great seminar! Or I think it's been a pretty good day, and they beat me up. It's like, well, you didn't do this, and you didn't follow the book, and I didn't like your tie, and your shoes weren't shined or whatever. And so the thing is, you know, you're going to, if you're not careful, let someone simply based on personality lead you away from your basic question set. Just advice, don't let that happen. Whether they're chatty and friendly or more quiet and reserved and a little bit standoffish and all that, you know, don't let it get to you. Also, by the way, there are a lot of things that happen that make sense outside of Indian country that do not make sense in Indian country. For example, um, before I knew any better, I was talking to a group and I was talking about positions of power during a meeting. And I mentioned that when you first enter the room, if you have your choice of chairs, go to the head of the table, and it gives you a position of power. Well, in the fullness of time, I've come to learn that that's really a very, very bad thing to do in Indian country. That from a cultural standpoint, it's impolite. It's like either, whoever the host is, as you please sit here, or simply wait for everyone else to sit down and whatever's left, then go sit there. Because otherwise, culture, it doesn't follow. Now, I use that example to make this point. In some cultures, looking people straight in the eye is somewhat offensive, and what have you, and it's impolite. And so more than once, after I've had interviewed someone, then somebody else interviews them, and the other person will say, well, I didn't like the guy because he would never look me in the eye. Well, people are different. Again, some people are chatty and what have you and make good eye contact and others don't, which in and of itself, I don't know that shows that someone is shifty or insecure and what have you. It might, but I don't think that it's like a binary decision. The light is on or off. It's like if they don't look at your eyes, then then somehow there's something wrong with them. Okay. All right. Two approaches to the BI thing, the series of questions targeted at each of the core competencies that you're looking at, and then also the in-depth probing questions, which is what I've suggested to you, where they give you an answer like, yes, I know about your organization, you do X, Y, Z, then you probe. How'd you find that out? How'd you get that information? Now, here is a reference slide. I'm going to go past it. If there's enough time, I'll come back to some of these slides. But again, I want to get through my presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, if I could save a little bit of time at the end to answer some questions, I'd love to do that. So like strategic thinking, just as an example of how these things would be, it would be, let me look at the second one. Describe a time you created a strategy to achieve a longer term business objective. So you say, well, I'm not in a decision-making posture, okay? But if you were asked that question, maybe you think to yourself, but I did, I wasn't in a decision-making posture, but I added some value. So maybe a question that you might want to ask, it's a little bit different, would be the first one. Describe a challenge or opportunity you identified based on your industry knowledge and how you developed a strategy to respond to it. And there are a lot of times where someone has not been in a decision-making role, and if the question that you ask them always assumes that they had the power, they had the authority to actually do something, you not be giving them a fair chance to really reveal how smart or talented or knowledgeable they are based on real life experience. My guess is all of us have met people who are functionally illiterate. They just haven't had a chance in life to get a really strong education, or just in terms of their exposure outside of a very small geographic area, they haven't had a chance to become quote unquote worldly or whatever. But the thing is, they're street smart, they're life smart and what have you. So in your question sets, there are times, particularly if you're looking at someone for like a managerial role or something like that, or that they would grow into that role as a natural progression in their career, sure, then you would ask questions that assume that they had some level of authority, but don't always assume that, okay? Um, Here's you went on innovation, teamwork, and all that. And this one, I want to pause one for a second. Um, Look at the second question there. I think that one's a pretty decent one. It goes along with the last thing that I said, where people don't always have true authority based on a hierarchical organization. Chief executive, vice president, director, and so on and so forth. And yet they're an influencer just based on their personality, their knowledge base, their trustworthiness, and what have you. Or that they're just an elder that they're respect for, irrespective of the position they hold in that department or in the organization itself. So describe a situation where you were successful in getting people to work together effectively. Not a bad question at all. All right. I had mentioned the follow-up questions. I'm not going to go through these because, again, I want to make sure that I get through all my material. But here it would be a question set dealing with innovation. And oh, by the way, if you do go to Google or whatever browser you use, and you are searching for question sets, look at these headers on my slides: strategic thinking. So strategic thinking, behavioral questions, performance-based questions, innovation questions, teamwork questions, that kind of a thing. This one's on motivation. The purpose of this slide is to also get you to understand the concept. I'm trying to reinforce it, of asking basically a closed-end question, but then following it up with a BI question. Do you feel motivated in your current job? Yes, I really do. Well, that's great. What are the motivators? Give me a time that something motivated you. What is it about your job that you've been doing that motivates you? All right. Um, does competition increase your desire? I'm a competitive person. I like to win. Well, here is not a, oh, that sounds great and all that. Well, give me an example, of, how, your desire to succeed helped you succeed. And so once again, if they're going to use either IPAR or STAR a lot of times, which is fine, it's still giving you the insight that you're looking for. All right. Now, there are different types of questions. There's unstructured, which is just a free-flowing conversation. And in doing an interview, I would urge you to at least give the impression that you're having a conversation rather than you're interrogating them. In other words, these questions we're talking about, you would tell me about a time when you, and then they answer it and you go, thank you. Tell me about, describe for me. And so it's almost accusatory if you do that, and it's going to shut people down and it's going to turn them off where they don't want to come to work for your organization because they figure if everyone, I don't want to work there. And so unstructured, interview types are, less formal, more conversational, but let it be a conversation. It is an interview, but in a more, informal way. It's like everyone, you follow a practice you feel is best for you. I want to make an interviewee feel comfortable. And so if I'm doing a remote interview, over Zoom or, go to meeting or something like that, I make sure that my background is one that goes along with what I'm trying to achieve. I want a very formal background. I want it to be very business-like. Look at the background behind me. This is where I live. This is my home. And I wanted to give you all the feeling I have invited you into my home. Do I have an office that looks like an office? Yeah, but I didn't want that because that would create a barrier between us. And so this idea of the interview types, think about, how you're setting the stage together with, the actual questions you're going to ask. Then there are the various interview approaches. There's, the telephone pre-screen, one-on-one panel, and then different types of question sets. Now, critical to all of this is in fact having an up-to-date and good job description. I don't want to be overly, melodramatic and flap my arms and talk loud and all of this stuff. But everyone, you need to make sure that you have up-to-date job descriptions. You should take a look at them every. You should urge as strongly as you can without being melodramatic and crazy. Get managers to look at the job descriptions of their direct reports at least annually, and then help you, if you're in HR, help you keep it up to date. How, it drives me crazy in the HR world where, people will say, well, writing job is your problem, not mine. What do you mean? If I'm trying to help you, manager, succeed in your endeavors so that there are the desired outcomes you want, then it's your responsibility to help me, the person in HR. Yeah, I'll write it for you, but I need the data. I need to understand your expectations. I have to understand, have you intellectually even sent realistic benchmarks of what is acceptable behavior? Like, I don't want to take us down the path of, how do you do a performance evaluation and all that. But everyone, honestly, many managers have never looked at a job description and then actually broken it down for this job that this person's doing, this particular task. Let's call it a task rather than the overall job. For this task, have I benchmarked it? In other words, 27 widgets an hour is an acceptable. 30 is really pretty good. 32 is great. 37, oh no, they're rushing through it. The quality has gone down because that's too much. And so here's a benchmark that I can use for acceptable behavior. Here's one for superior behavior, and then there's one that's a red flag that they're doing something wrong. If they're producing, in my example, they're producing that many widgets per hour, then the quality just can't be there. And then of course, it's all below the norm. So what does that have, these BI questions? That's what you're going to write your questions about, to see if they've lived up to that. It's like everyone, I've read who knows how many, job advertisements that will say must be proficient with, Microsoft suite of software. Great. That means Excel. Well, everyone, what level does that mean? If someone on a resume says, yes, I'm proficient with Excel, or I know Excel, what does that mean? Am I for someone that can merely pull up an existing spreadsheet and repopulate the cells with data? Okay, that's a particular set. Am I looking for someone that can create a spreadsheet of their own and put in the formulae? That's a different skill set. Or am I looking for someone that can create multiple spreadsheets that when I update the field in one, updates the fields in the others? Those are three different levels. Did they lie on the resume by saying, yes, I know how to use Excel? No, but you just didn't ask the right question. Now that might be fine for an advertisement, but when you're doing the interview, you want to ask, tell me about a time. Again, let's say we're looking for the highest level of performance in my example. So I would say, tell me about a project you worked on where you created at least 3 different spreadsheets using, a lot of the same criteria, that when you updated the XYZ field, that it then updated the totals and the tabulations on the others. So, tell all the time when. And so rather than just saying, do you know how to do that? They go, yeah, I know how to do that. Now you actually want them to immerse themselves in telling you what that actually means. Now, what we want to do in gathering the data to write these questions is look at these things, the KSAOs, the CASOs, the knowledge, the skill, the ability or the aptitude, and the other characteristics. For those of you that are counseling some of your young people on how to go find a job, and let us say that they're looking at usajobs.gov, all right, usajobs.gov. is, and by the way, there's all sorts of Native American preferences for federal jobs. So if you yourself have never looked at usajobs.gov, I urge you to do it. Not to leave your current job. I'm not saying that. I'm not encouraging you to go, wow, that's great, man, I'm out of here. No, what I'm saying though is that once again, if you're counseling, someone on there, they might want to go look for a new job. That you take a look there. Again, and it's got all kinds of information on that website. But this, everyone, that this is the stuff you're going to get asked about, really generally now in the HR world generally. These are the things that people write job descriptions around, and they write job advertisements around. Knowledge, the things a person needs to know in order to perform the job effectively. Skill, how well do they do it? In other words, do they know how to use Excel? Yes, but at what skill level? Now, it could be that someone says, no, I've never done multiple spreadsheets that basically you update one and updates the other, but the things you're describing, like different spreadsheets that take the same data and then analyze it in a different way, I have done that. Well, everyone, that seems to me that a stepping stone to the next level, you would give them the extra training, and so they've indicated an aptitude, an ability to then do whatever the job called for. And then other characteristics are more the soft things, the attitudes of personality, their personal values, things like that, which I'm not denigrating. Those are all very, very important, even though I'm not going to give you any real examples. Now, one of the very, very, very best places I know for you to get the data you need to write both the interview questions and job descriptions, things like that, is the government website, the ONET Online. The government, it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics that did this many years ago. I don't remember how far it was. The Bureau of Labor Statistics took 900 different types of occupations and they broke them down into data sets. They use this approach of the KSAOs, the CASOs, all right, and they have these sets, things that people have to have for different jobs. It is a wonderful website. I can't urge you strongly enough to familiar with it. I think any HR practitioner really needs to have a comfort level with this resource. Now, there's another resource that goes along with it, and it's called the Occupational Outlook Handbook. And what it does is it describes, industries in a narrative, like it's like white papers on things. So they brief you on different industries. You might want to look for private sector career paths, and that is talked about on the ONET Online. And so there's 16 clusters, there's 79 pathways and various jobs. Now, if you want a matrix, all right, of the private sector clusters and pathways, you can write to my assistant, Lorianne, at llee@maxassociates.com. In fact, for those of you that joined us late, let me say this. I said at the beginning, let me say it because I could see on that some of you joined us after we began. If you want a copy of my slides, just write me or Lori, either one, max@maxmullerassociates.com. I'll send you the slides, but I will just automatically I'll include the matrix for any of you that have an interest in this. If you just want the matrix, and then that's fine too. Okay, everyone, I've got to hurry up. Our time is growing short here. There are examples of a toolkit that I put together for some of my clients that I use, and it has these. So there's a job analysis worksheet, job audit worksheet, and all of these things. So let me kind of show you what they are. The job analysis one is one where you begin to break down the job. You've gotten all this data and what have you. So now you're starting to put it down into a format where you can use it to write your job descriptions and your BI questions. And for example, here's a secretarial position. And notice, look down under the first paragraph there where there's a dash. It says receives calls. So it's where you would put down how many calls per hour someone would have to be able to handle. The nature of the calls. Are the calls real technical? Or is it just someone is a receptionist and I need to speak to George? So then they connect you with George and that's it. So that would be a higher call volume that they can handle because the responses they give are very, very simple. And so you're filling this out, the frequency of the thing, the duration, how much effort is it, how complex is it, and all of that. All right. Then you want to look for various things that go along with the KSAOs, measurable skills, concrete technical skills, what the applicant knows, and all of that. The abilities, all right? And again, I don't want to take the time to look at each of these. You can get them for yourself and read them, but these are the things that you could build your question sets around, all right? One of the things really don't forget is the physical environment. Some of your tribes own construction companies. Some of you have, significant hunting and fishing, other outdoor activities, hiking and mountain climbing, on your lands. And so if you have guides and what have you, and you're trying to hire for people to be a guide, I think you need to be mindful of, are they going to be periods where they're exposed to extreme heat or dangerous animals and what have you. All right. It's like I was fishing in Alaska once and I was a tourist, and our guide had this humongous pistol, one of those Dirty Harry pistols. For those of you that are old enough to remember the Dirty Harry movies, it was a 44 Magnum. So he's got this thing in a shoulder holster, and we're out in the middle of like nowhere. And one of the other tourists, like me, said, "Is that gun really necessary?" And the guy simply looked around and looked back at her and said, "Yes." And so again, don't forget about the in getting information. I would urge you to interview, the supervisors over those areas to get information about job duties, responsibilities, but also talk to the people that have that job now or have had it. And the reason is supervisors are going to have a particular viewpoint different than the people doing the job, which is they have different functions. Even supervisors who had that job for a long time and now moved into a supervisory position, in the fullness of time, they're going to lose sight of some of the aspects of it. So, and let me give you an example. In your head, think of what you're looking at. Immediately, think, what am I looking at? Many people will see a rabbit. Other people will see a duck. Now, you've seen one or the other, and some of you say, wait a minute, I'm seeing one of them. Well, everyone, those of you that see the duck, start at the eye, all right, and then move to your left, your eyes to the left, and you will see the bill. For those of you that see the rabbit, all right, start at the ears at the far left, and then let your eyes go to the right, or start on the other end of the rabbit, if you will, and see where there what looks like a mouth basically, and then move left, and you end up with the ears. So that basically it's a set of facts, all right, but they're interpreted differently on the person. And that's why, to really understand fully what a job is all about, you need to talk to not only the supervisors, but the workers themselves. Okay. Here's an audit form where you're beginning to now write out all this information that you gathered. Let me go back to this earlier slide. All right. Okay. The stuff that you've gathered here, this is kind of the raw data. And now you're starting to organize it right here is where you organize. Then you go the next step and you break it down into the essential, non-essential functions and the percentages of time, because there's going to be some things that are really critical to you, even though there's some things that are repetitive, but they're routine. There are other things that are only periodic, but they're very, very important. All right. You can use this next one as a screening tool. So down the left-hand side here, you're putting things that are most important to you, and you want to get away from any kind of bias. So you might want to take all your applicants and just give them a number or something. That isn't critical. You could do it if you wanted to, don't have to. But what you're doing is you have a a legend as to what your symbols mean and all that, and so that your skill sets going down the left, and then each applicant, each resume, each application, you take it and you break it down like this, and it gives you a really quick way of going through a lot of applicants quickly and fairly, and getting rid of the people that you're not going to talk to, and only interview the ones that have most of it going for them, so that you can see that applicant B, that person's great, but so is applicant C. And so once you've used this as a screening tool, don't refer back to just a way of figuring out who am I going to interview. Now, everyone, there's just a number of the slides now that really are for reference purposes. Earlier, one of my earlier slides talked about the different methods of doing interviews. It can be phone, the video, and you've got the different modalities. And by that, understand, you could have recorded interviews, and then you and others look at recorded interviews so you can compare one person to another, but you're all seeing the same thing. All right. You could share questions with the candidates and let them answer it in advance and in writing, or you give it to them and they say, "This is what I'm going to ask you," and then do it remotely. Now, some of you say, "What sense does that make?" Well, everyone, it depends again on the job in question. If you're really interested in their writing capabilities and their verbal capabilities, that's as much, letting them know what the question is and letting them answer you in advance, it gives you a much better idea of how it's really going to work out. Okay. And then using, formal assessment tools. Now, there are reference checking questions, telephone reference checking things, and what have you for you to use. I also would urge you to have prepared note sheets and what have you. This is the Fair Credit Reporting stuff I mentioned here. The bottom line there is get permission to do a background check. Basically, that's all about. As far as criminal background checks, the Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act does not apply to Indian tribes. All right. The race, religion, age, sex, and so forth. But everyone, in doing assessments of someone that has a criminal, history, should you consider it or not, this guidance from the government really lays out good considerations for you to use. Okay. Give it attention during interviews, interleave the questions, the BI questions with other things. I'm going to wrap it up by saying there's a danger zone in your questions. Don't discriminate. Don't discriminate. There are different protected classes. Look at your own tribe's groupings of protected classes. Who can you not discriminate against? There is hiring preference, for tribal nations and wholly owned tribal enterprises. So you can discriminate in favor of members of your own tribe or other Native Americans, all right? Even if someone else might be more qualified. It depends on how your particular set of policies are set up. Also, don't forget that many of you have federal grants under Title VI. And under Title VI, you now run into, you can't discriminate based on some of the federal protected classes. Even though Title VII, the one that specifically talks about race, religion, age, sex, physical disability, and so on and so forth, that might not apply to you, Title VII. Title VI actually might, if you're getting federal grant money, okay? If you don't need to ask a question, don't ask it, okay? Everyone, again, we've run out of time, but if you do have some questions, I'll hang around. If I'll leave it up to Janet, whether she wants to entertain some questions or not, I'll be happy to. And for those of you that do have to leave us, if there is a question you have and you've got to leave, again, max@maxmullerassociates.com. I'll do my best. Janet, back to you.
Max, we can spend hours to talk about recruiting because it you touched on so much. Wish that we can really get into, I love job audits, all the different types of interviews, but I myself have a question. You talked about job descriptions and having the managers work with HR to develop those job descriptions and to look at those job descriptions. In your opinion, how often should we look at those and make sure that they are, really working with the interview questions that you have? Because as a recruiter, you have to know that job specifically. You need to be prepared. You need to know everything about that job. So in your opinion, how often should we look at those job descriptions?
For all job descriptions, at least once a year. So just as a generic, all job descriptions at least once a year. From that point, though, it depends on how dynamic the job is in terms of change. For example, in the IT world, there's so much stuff that changes software and what have you, that there, I would say at least once every 6 months, to make sure that the requirements of staying up with whatever application software you're using, that it hasn't changed, that it might be that the software company you bought it from, that they have a new iteration that drops out some of the skill sets that people needed before, but they've been replaced by something else. In the IT world, it is so dynamic, things change so frequently there's one I would definitely look at once every 6 months. Beyond that, I'll say it again, it depends on how dynamic the change is for a particular job. If you are, let's say you're building a hotel, and the tribe and people available to it really have no history in terms of operating a facility like that, then at least in the early days, maybe the first year or two, I think that really reviewing things every 90 days, which maybe might sound like too much, but here's a brand new environment basically for everyone. And although I'm sure the managers that would be put in charge have been, trained and cross-trained and what have you, still in all, their expectations based on the reality of the resources and the population of staff available to them might require changes in the job description. An example, I'm not going to mention the tribe. It's a tribe that correctly and properly wanted to, as much work as possible to enrolled members. And so they had a number of smoke shops, and they would put people in charge of the smoke who basically couldn't do basic math in terms of figuring out discounts. And so common sense would tell any of us, even if you never run like a grocery store or anything like that, that there's going to be a profit margin for ketchup that's going to be a different profit margin piece of luggage or cigarettes or candy or whatever. And so this tribe had a schedule of percentages of profit on various items, soda pop one, and so forth. All right. The problem was the people running these places didn't know how to calculate the profit margins. They also didn't know how to calculate if I offer buy one, get one free, or buy two and get the second one half price, and this, that, and the other. They didn't know how to do it. And so they had to basically change their expectations in the short run of the expectations of the job. Now, provide training on an ongoing basis, and then obviously the job description changed. I use that example simply to put out again this idea that if there's been a significant change in operations, or like IT, it's a dynamic field, then I think you have to do it more often. And again, let's say 6 months for a situation like that.
Great, thank you. We are at 1:07, and is there anyone that has any comments or questions for Max? We would love to hear any feedback. And Max, your presentation was just great.
Thank you.
It's always
Thank you.
it was always great. There's always things to learn, and really appreciate your time. If there is no questions, I would encourage everyone that has any additional questions or would like to talk to Max or see if they can, if Max can share some of his reference slides. His email is max@MullerAssociates.com. And Max, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who had joined us. Our next coffee will be on November 2nd, and appreciate everyone joining us today. Max, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Be well, everyone. Thank you.